Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the June 11th media availability after our City Council Emergency Advisory Committee meeting. Once again, we have the Mayor with us, followed by Interim City Manager Adam Laughlin, after which they'll both be available to answer your questions. And again, we're grateful for the interpretive services of Kevin Culp and Diane Deondred. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. Reminder that non-medical face coverings are helpful in many circumstances and can make a sharp pocket square. So thank you for tuning in. As you all know, the province announced further details and a June 12th timeline for stage 2 of its relaunch strategy since the last time we've chatted. And as we heard from Adam today, the city will be reopening a few more amenities next week, which is encouraging, and Adam will get into that a little bit more in a bit. Now, I know that Edmontonians are keen to see our fantastic recreation facilities and pools open, but as previously mentioned, we are still working through the plans to do so safely and given the financial limitations your city is still managing. But we're still tackling a pandemic in this province, and we need to remain vigilant, all of us, when it comes to following public health orders such as physical distancing, hand washing, and limiting your exposure to large gatherings in order to keep COVID cases down to a manageable level for our healthcare system. So please remember to wear masks indoors or non-medical face coverings where physical distancing is a challenge, and use your common sense. If a restaurant or store is busy and you're concerned, then consider taking yourself away from the risk and visit at another time or go to another favorite local business. Now, on a more serious note, as I mentioned, our city still needs to see an injection of financial support and cash flow to be able to return to our more normal operations as part of our relaunch. Edmonton is not alone among municipalities, particularly Canada's big cities, in our economic hardships, as we have repeated for months now, due to COVID-19. However, last week, cities across Canada were very glad to hear the Prime Minister agree to offer $14 billion in funding to provinces and territories. However, we have yet to hear from the government of Alberta what portion of that we can expect here in Edmonton to help us with our safe relaunch strategy to support economic revamp. Now, our usual revenue streams have been severely hit. Edmontonians are able to delay the payment of their property taxes, for example, and for some time we have not been able to safely collect transit and parking fees, though those are being reinstituted very shortly. Municipalities have done their best to tackle this pandemic without the proper financial support in hand. Our well-planned budgets are already strained by the economic hardships our province and city have been facing over the last several years, and those challenges have exploded in the wake of COVID-19, and the uncertainty going forward continues to be a challenge for us as we attempt to relaunch too. Now, I know it may sound like a broken record, but an injection of cash is essential if we're going to return to our previous service levels. Edmontonians have suffered enough through economic hardships already, and we do not want to add that to that strain by having to consider more service cuts below what people are already starting to register concerns with us about, or tax increases when we've worked so hard to flatten the curve on your taxes for this difficult economic year. I do want to note that there were a number of very thoughtful questions today from Councillor Henderson on spray parks, for example, and what we could do to get those open hopefully sometime this summer, and I've heard loud and clear from parents on that one as well. Hopefully that one's a low-cost item for us, and that's something we've heard loud and clear and we'll work on. Councillor Zadek and a number of other councillors asked very thoughtful questions about the dandelions and the long grass and what we might be able to do, what the cost implications are. I look forward to further discussion about turf management and what we can do given the financial constraints your city is under. Again, aid would help us restore those service levels, and I saw even Councillor Nickel indicate on social media that he's working on his own thoughts about recreation facility reopening, and I look forward to seeing his motion for how we can do that. So all hands on deck at City Council trying to figure out how to manage the financial implications of this challenge and restore service levels given the economic constraints that we have. So I appreciate everyone's patience and understanding as we work through this together. And I do appreciate also that our local Chamber of Commerce has recently added their name to a letter to the Prime Minister from the Canadian Global Cities Council and Business Council of Canada, acknowledging that cities are out of options and recognizing that cities are in fact facing a dire financial crisis. And so I am hopeful that the Premier will be in touch soon with some good news and hopefully a check for relief so that we can safely restart too. Happy to take, well, actually, Adam's going to go next, and then happy to take your questions after that.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today. Today at the Emergency Advisory Committee, I provided Council with an update on Stage 1 actions that the City has recently taken. Provide an overview of those. The funicular resumes operations from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. starting June 15th. It does provide an important access to the river valley for all Edmontonians to use. The booking and rental of city-owned sports fields, ball diamonds, and staff track and field facilities will resume on June 15th as well. Rentals in city-operated facilities are linked to our rec center reopening plans that are still underway and still being evaluated. The sales and administration offices at Beachmount and South Haven cemeteries will reopen for in-person appointments starting on June 17th. And a modified selection of outdoor fitness programs will be available starting June 22nd in outdoor spaces at select city facilities. These include Terwilliger, the Meadows, Clairview, Commonwealth Field, and Clark Stadium, and Rundle Family Center. You can get more information on our website, and just a reminder that the rec facilities will remain closed. The Animal Care and Control Center begins its Phase 2 of reopening on June 15th, and that will include the intake of stray healthy cats by appointment only. Residential and commercial tenants of city-owned facilities that are facing economic hardship will be offered rent payment support for the July to December 2020 period. Residential tenants will be offered a rent payment plan, and small commercial tenants will be offered 3 months rent forgiveness of up to 75%, provided that the remaining 25% of the rent is paid by the end of 2020. Our transit fare reintroduction is on track for June 15th. The city will also start the distribution of non-medical face masks at 7 transit center and LRT stations, and with transit operators and peace officers providing that. This is part of the Government of Alberta's plan. Our allotment of masks that they provided is 500,000, and we'll be distributing that until we run out. Using transit hubs as the distribution points allows those that do not have a vehicle to access masks the opportunity to get a mask. And again, and I'll touch on this a little later, physical distancing expectations are still in place, and the masks are there that if you can't observe the physical distancing requirements. 5 big bin events are planned for the period between mid-August through the fall. In terms of Stage 2 reopenings, like most Edmontonians, we welcome the news that the province has accelerated the timeline for Stage 2 reopening. Our goals remain unchanged, preventing exposure among Edmontonians and protecting their safety and well-being. We will continue to watch closely the number of new and active cases in the Edmonton zone. The city Stage 1 and 2 relaunch decisions and actions have public health rules as our central focus. And I've shared this previously, that the guidelines that are provided by the province, we interpret those as rules, and our expectation is that Edmontonians and businesses follow those guidelines, and we will enforce accordingly. We assess our recommendations against the current realities related to operational resources, our budget constraints, and public compliance. We aim for continuous, thoughtful progress that positions Edmonton for long-term stability. And as a reminder, and I will continue to sound like a broken record, 2-meter physical distancing, limiting the gatherings are still public health orders, and they are enforceable. If you can't physical distance, please wear a mask and ensure that you're taking good hand hygiene habits to ensure that we're minimizing the spread. Thank you, and the Mayor and I are happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Adam. We have 5 reporters online and Jeremy from CTV in the room. Jeremy, we'll go to you first. Go ahead.
Sure. Perhaps a question for the Mayor. Some concerns were raised by a couple of councillors about the sort of the timing of this e-bike grant program rollout. What's your stance? What are your thoughts on that?
So appreciate that the news that the city was offering incentives to support people to diversify their transportation choices through the e-bike incentive, that people had questions about the timing of that, given everything else that I've had to say about the city's budget challenges. We've cut a lot of things. However, council's also been quite intentional about not wanting to compromise the city's strategic plan. And so to the extent that not just acknowledging but acting on the climate emergency remains a strategic priority for the City of Edmonton, and I believe for our council and I believe for our residents. We did not curtail programs related to supporting a transition to a lower carbon future. Nothing about the pandemic and nothing about the economic situation has changed the underlying climate imperative in my estimation, and anyone who has argued that because we've seen lower emissions during this time that we now no longer need to take action, but is also arguing that we urgently need to go back to normal and get back to everything we were doing before. You know, I've seen some really interesting arguments, but to me it boils down to, do you still take climate change as seriously as the other pressing challenges that the city is strategically responding to in our strategic plan? And I think our council's position is yes, though I recognize that people had a bit of a head tilt and said, how do we have money for that and not have money to cut grass? So it really was a timing thing in the sense that the incentive was included in a whole suite of other initiatives council approved over many, many meetings in previous years and through the budget to authorize a number of different programs to support people making greener choices over time. The timing is what it is, but our commitment to supporting Edmontonians to transition to a lower carbon future is actually the underlying point here.
Did you have a follow-up?
It's sort of on a different topic, but if
Go
that's all
ahead.
right. I believe it's for Adam. Just on the, you know, we know that you're sort of caught off guard as far as, you know, the rec centers and pools and stuff being brought forward in phase 2. Can you give more sort of a detailed answer about what actually needs to happen to open these rec centers? You know, staffing levels. You know, where are the staff that are needed to operate these things?
Great question, Jeremy. So what we need to do, and we do this with all of the services that we look at reinitiating, we assess, can we provide that service from a public health perspective? Can we afford to open that service? From a sustainability perspective, can we open that service? And then if we do see a spike in cases, can we quickly close or restrict that service to minimize ongoing spread or exacerbated spread? So we start with those, and then once we answer those, that if it's a yes for all of those, then we get into the logistics. And so you can imagine large rec facility, limit of number of people in there, 50. How do you actually navigate individuals through that facility, and what are the choices that we can offer them to adhere to those 4 questions that we have? So it is a fairly detailed body of work to ensure that everything we're doing not only creates a safe environment for our public and our employees, but that we've got an operational plan in place to ensure that we can consider any issues that could be materialized, and that financially we can provide that service.
Are they still hired? Do you need to rehire people for rec centers?
So with our staff, the approach that we've taken, and this is through 3 different waves, more or less, maybe 4 waves, we provided temporary layoff notices. And in those temporary layoff notices, there's an opportunity to return individuals to work. What we've been able to do with the support of our unions is through redeployment and the ability to utilize the individuals across those different union lines, that we can be more nimble in terms of how we provide the service. So if we do open up a facility, we do have to look at the current resources that we have, and if we do need to return folks to work, then we begin the process to do that.
Thanks, Jeremy. We'll go next to Scott on the phone. Go ahead, Scott.
Yes, thank you. We're hearing national coverage that between the Prime Minister and the Premiers, this 14-day essential services employee for the NHL has been cleared up. So what does that do for the hub city approach that we're working on?
We continue to, hi Scott, it's Adam. We continue to be engaged with the Oilers Entertainment Group. I think my understanding is that was one of the restrictions or challenges associated with any Canadian proposals. So if that's the case, that's a positive. At this point in time, I don't know more details related to that, but just reiterate that we're regularly engaged with the Oilers on the potential opportunities associated with that, but don't have specific details. And maybe the mayor does.
No, I went to Adam because I thought maybe he had something more recent than I do on that. Thanks for the question, Scott, and that's very encouraging because I understand that a way to safely quarantine and cohort players in Canadian hub cities was really one of the only remaining issues. So if that, and I haven't had that confirmed, but I trust you that if that is the case, that removes the last regulatory and public health concern that the city of Edmonton would have, and so remains to be seen then obviously what the NHL chooses to do, but you know, that's very hopeful is what I can say, and that again the opportunity as other sports and facilities come back online and people are allowed to recreate, albeit within still significant limitations on large gatherings, that opportunity for our hotels to play host to the teams, an opportunity for Edmontonians to cheer for their team and at least know that it's in the same area code as they tear through the playoffs, hopefully, that these would be welcome things for us economically and socially at a difficult time. And that the reputation opportunity, again, for the city of Edmonton, one of the smaller market teams that has done more heavy lifting to support its team than lots of others, to show off our facilities and help bring some dollars in to support the restart of them. So that's all very hopeful.
Thank you. Did you have a follow-up question, Scott?
Yeah, completely other topic. And again, this is my turn to be broken record for the mayor. What are you hearing out of the premiers and the prime minister talking today? Are you getting any answers?
So I've spoken to a number of federal cabinet ministers within the last week. On top, it's been a full week, and conversations are continuing with the provincial counterparts and progressing. And what I would say is that from speaking to the mayors, our big concern is that everything that is within the $14 billion federal envelope is important. Testing for provinces who don't have it as robust as Alberta, childcare so people can get back to work, but that there needs to be a floor under and some certainty behind support for municipalities, and again, particularly around the urgent transit challenges that we're facing. So my conversations and all of the correspondence, including the letter that the Chamber signed off on today, reinforce the importance of essential municipal services to a safe and effective and successful restart of the Canadian economy. So the Prime Minister's recognition of that, I think, opens up a lot of space. It now falls to the Premiers and the federal government to work it out. Of course, we would still always ask to actually be around that table of the First Ministers where we are being talked about, or at least consulted on the negotiations as they proceed, so we can flag concerns. Because where we have been left out, an example that the Mayor of Saskatoon raised on our last call is, you don't have to go very far back to look at cannabis revenue sharing as an example, where the federal government tried to do the right thing and made additional money available to provinces to pass along to municipalities, and few, if any, of us ever received any of that federal generosity because it was caught up by provinces along the way. So the track record has not been good, either of the federal government of ensuring that the dollars flow to municipalities or provinces actually delivering. And so we wait with cautious optimism to see whether the Premiers and the Prime Minister will be able to work something out that helps us safely restart Canadian cities and support the economic resurgence that we all need to help pay back the bills for the relief that we've all needed, including cities.
Thank you, Scott. We'll go next to Keith at the Edmonton Journal. Go ahead, please.
Hi there. This is a question for, I guess, either Adam or the Mayor. Wanted to kind of follow up on what Jeremy was asking about. Obviously, you're following the public health orders from the province, but as you begin to open things, ramp up services, what's your level of fear on the potential that you might have to start shutting things down?
Well, I'll say a little bit, and then I'll go to Adam for the operational. I think first and foremost, our concern is for Edmontonians and keeping them safe, as the City of Edmonton exists by definition to serve them. Integral to that, though, is the safety of our own employees and workforce, and that's been a motivating factor in the City of Edmonton taking the step, albeit a day earlier than the province, of making changes to our service levels. So I think in order that our staff can provide the level of service and safety and cleaning, for example, but also ensure spacing and maintain equipment and all of the other important work that our employees do, that we've got to balance the desire for people to get back into the facilities with the financial challenges that we have, while supporting people to be safe in their use of civic facilities ultimately, while also ensuring that our staff, that risk to their health is managed appropriately as well. So Adam's giving me the thumbs up.
Thanks. Keith, do you have a second question?
Yeah, just drilling down a little bit more there, like with respect to rec facilities or transit. I mean, what are the complications? What are the budget implications of potentially hiring back a bunch of staff and then having to say, oh, sorry, you have, we don't have any work for you anymore? Like, how much of a factor is that in your consideration of whether to reopen and how to reopen?
I've talked about that a lot, but he's the one who's got the finger on that particular thing. So I'm going to ask him to. It's a real concern for me. That yo-yo effect would not be good from a staff morale point of view, and a culture point of view, or financially, or straightforward for citizens to understand. So those would be the political considerations, but I'll go to Adam to supplement on the mechanics.
Thanks, Keith. And I echo the Mayor's comments. One of the factors that we use for our assessment is our ability to close and the impacts associating with closing if we have a spike. So we need to be thoughtful, we need to be cautious, and we need to be considerate as it relates to not only Edmontonians' needs, but our staffing needs. And the Mayor described the yo-yo that could happen associated with this. So your first question was how concerned, It's a regular conversation topic that we have at our executive leadership team table around the practical, methodical, thoughtful, considerate way to approach a reopening that doesn't put us in that situation where we're jumping too fast and that we're not doing a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to a decision to reopen. In saying that, we need to be working closely with the provincial officials because they are the public health authority and they've provided us the guidance related to how you do that. So we really rely on those guidelines that they produce around these different operations to ensure that we're not only approaching it from a City of Edmonton perspective, but from a public health perspective as provided by the province in terms of those guidelines.
Thank you. We'll go next to Vinesh at Global. Go ahead, Vinesh.
Yeah, Adam, just along those same veins, so, for the rest of 2020 and even going into 2021, do we expect a full, depending on, where we are in the relaunch, do we expect a full restoration of city amenities like rec centers, or is it going to be a different kind of playbook for the next foreseeable while?
Great question, Vinesh, and I would say it's the latter. It's going to be a different playbook for the next little while. We alluded to council, we've alluded to council in the last few meetings that part of our work is to reimagine what the city looks like. And so when we get into relaunch and more full recovery, we do have to take into consideration, can we return to the way we were before? I described it as the new normal today, that the new normal will be different than what we're used to, because we don't see that the relaxation means that it's going to be an elimination of the physical distancing requirement, the need to limit social gatherings, and to take a public health approach into the decisions that we're making. So I think that reimagine could mean a different kind of transit service, a different kind of rec service, a different kind of asset inventory that we decide or recommend, to council that should be opened or should remain closed.
You have a further question, Vinesh?
Yes, this will be for the mayor, and just kind of going to an earlier topic from earlier this week. My understanding is that the public hearing has been confirmed for next week, or can you confirm what is planned for next week and just talk a little bit about that, please? Sure.
I heard loud and clear that people wish to be heard from many perspectives, but that particularly earlier this week that the Black Lives Matter organizers wish to be included in discussions about systemic racism at the city and particularly around policing policies. And so we weren't able to do that at yesterday's meeting, so part of my commitment was that decision-making going forward would include a non-statutory public hearing. I signed the meeting notice a couple of hours ago, confirming that we will be holding it has to be virtual still because we were looking at the relaunch requirements. There still isn't a straightforward way to have large numbers of people attend City Hall for in-person meetings. Most of council will still be remote, if that gives you any indication of the continued seriousness of the pandemic condition. So we will, however, on Monday, commence a public hearing. We've scheduled or held several days worth of time, and we'll do our best to accommodate a number of different time blocks for the convenience of speakers to have some sense of when they might be able to present based on how many people register. So we wanted to get the meeting notice out today so that people could register tomorrow and be on deck Monday morning to share input on the draft motion on the table. I also want to clear up one other point, which it was reported in a few places, or at least one, but also on social media, that council had made decisions. The only decision that was made yesterday was to hold the public hearing and to leave the motion that Councillor Knack put forward yesterday on the table for public feedback. And that's very much one of the premises of the public hearing, is to hear from Edmontonians on their broader set of related issues, and then specifically their feedback on what's proposed in the motion. That then allows council potentially to make adjustments to the motion based on public feedback before making decisions on these serious issues. And so yes, we will go ahead with the public hearing. It will be virtual, but we will take whatever time it takes next week to hear from people, and hopefully have some empathy for all of the heartfelt and pained expressions, particularly around Black, Indigenous, and people of color's experience with public safety in our community, which I think council wishes to respond to thoughtfully and meaningfully. But we need to hear more to be able to do that.
Thanks, Vinesh. We'll go to Natasha next. Go ahead, please.
Hello, thank you. My question is for Adam. I think it's your favorite topic, Adam, e-scooters. You had mentioned earlier that there was good compliance, and I'm wondering what you meant exactly. How were users compliant with the e-scooters, in what way?
Thanks, Natasha. I love all of these topics, so thanks. The compliance is actually twofold. It's to the users, and it's also to the operators or the providers of the e-scooter service. Within the expectations of this service, we built in and I mean, coming forward from the operators, more strict cleaning protocols and assembling, corralling the e-bikes or the scooters in an appropriate location. So it's actually been good compliance on both sides, that we're seeing the operators doing what they need to do from a cleanliness perspective and a corralling perspective, and also from a user perspective in terms of making sure that they're not being sort of left about and getting in the way, so to speak.
So can you, yes, thank you.
Go ahead.
Can you elaborate on how you're keeping track of that? Because I've noticed a lot of kind of wayward scooters being left in different places when we were told that there would be designated docking stations, or at least designated areas for them. So I'm wondering how basically you can say that when I'm kind of witnessing the opposite. So how are you checking in on that?
Well, so I guess it just depends locationally where you're seeing that, and certainly if you are, let us know. It's checking in with the operators, but it's also with some of our peace officers as they're doing their rounds, checking in and making sure that those protocols that we work through with e-scooter companies, that they're following them. So sort of recognize that it's not a perfect situation or solution, but comparatively, it has been a lot better from a compliance perspective.
If you are seeing problem locations, Natasha, we'd be interested to know about them. Thank you. We're going to go next to Dustin at the Edmonton Journal. Go ahead, please, Dustin. Thanks for waiting.
Hi, thank you. For Adam, I'm hoping you can confirm in more detail the reasoning for the reduced field lawn maintenance this year. Is it specifically to reduce expenses, or are resources being brought into this? Because I received numbers from the city that there are currently about 1,900 layoff employees, but there are 270 seasonal positions. So could it be possible that some of these employees are brought in to fill these seasonal positions, or is it because the city wants to reduce costs right now?
It is reducing the costs as the reason for the change in maintenance frequency. When we went forward with the temporary layoffs, there was recall that there were also pressures and demands in other areas based on a change in service, and one that we talked about a fair bit a while ago was cleaning of buses and the sanitization of buses, and that there was a heightened demand related to that. So while the number of temporary layoffs was for City of Edmonton specific staff was around 2,500. Close to 600 of those were redeployed where there were other pressures. There was also an approach where seasonal staff hiring that we typically do was accommodated with some permanent employees that were also redeployed. So that was a long answer to say that we've used our resources to meet the demands of providing services, and the reduced frequency on cutting is a budgetary decision.
Did you have a follow-up, Dustin?
I do, and also just to note, at least I would be hoping to see the cost savings number for that service this year compared to last year, if that would be available. That's not my question. My question is on any concern about loss of more rec center revenues when they do open up starting in July, because some people may now get memberships at YMCAs or private gyms that may open up as early as tomorrow and then not return to city rec facilities.
Well, I think we always try to play the where do we fit and where can we provide a service that isn't provided by the private sector, which we do from a price perspective, but also from a program perspective. Is there a concern? I mean, there's always a concern that your service being provided, and I would assume that this is the private sector as well, isn't meeting the demands of the users. I mean, the difference between private sector and public sector is that there is a business model in the private sector that is driven by revenues and financial, and not to say that it isn't for the public sector as well, but our source of funding for that is actually from the taxpayer. So we have to balance those tax pressure or taxpayer pressures with services that we can provide to our citizens. And as the mayor said, it's a constant struggle that we're working through in these unprecedented times to try and find the right balance of providing a service, considering the financial implications and the public health implications with those. So is it a concern? It's something that we want to monitor and make sure that we're providing the right service to meet the needs of Edmontonians in consideration of the private sector options that are available to them.
And Dustin, please work with our media relations unit. We'll do our utmost to get that cost-saving information to you in a timely fashion. Are there any last questions before we wrap up from anyone?
I just wanted to throw this in because it's difficult to hear over the phone. I'm not listening on YouTube, I'm on the call. So I'm not sure if this was covered at all. I know you're working through it, but is there any way you can give us a heads up on a couple of the rec centers that might be the first to open?
We don't have that information yet, Natasha, just that we're targeting early June for opening. And in terms of the numbers, which ones will open, which ones will not, don't have specifics on that. That's what we're working through right now.
That would be early July, Natasha.
July, yeah.
Thanks. Thanks everyone for being with us. Really appreciate it, and we'll look forward to speaking with you soon. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks.